So, the story of how America was formed, it's something a lot of us think we have a pretty good handle on, right? But, the simple version we usually get, it leaves out a ton of complexity. And that's exactly what we're going to dig into here.
So picture this. The first European ships are pulling up to the coast. And what do they see? Just this vast, enormous continent stretching out before them. To them, it looked, well, empty, pristine, totally untouched. And that's where we get that famous name, the New World.
But was it really new? I mean, that's the big question we're tackling today. We're going to push back on that whole New World idea by looking at the world that was already here, a world that was thriving for thousands and thousands of years before Columbus even thought about sailing.
Right. Let's dive into our first section. Because for the millions of people already living here, this place wasn't new at all, not even close. It was an ancient homeland, a world just packed with its own incredible history.
I mean, let's be clear, this was not an empty continent. It was absolutely teeming with thousands of different cultures, hundreds of languages. You had these dynamic societies with traditions going back forever, all connected by these super complex family and community networks.
And if you want a sense of just how complex things were, check this out. Around the year 1150, so way before Columbus, the city of Cahokia, which is right near where St. Louis is today, had a population of up to 30,000 people. 30,000!
Okay, but here's where it gets really mind-blowing. Let's put that number in context. At its peak, Cahokia was bigger than London was at the same time. Think about that. Bigger than London. Actually, no city in what's now the US and Canada would get that big again until after the American Revolution. That's just incredible.
So, we're not talking about a few simple, scattered groups of people here. These were civilizations. They had sophisticated farming, like the famous Three Sisters system with corn, beans, and squash. They had these huge trade networks that moved goods like copper and turquoise for over 1,000 miles. And they had really complex societies with advanced knowledge of things like astronomy and architecture. Just look at those amazing cliff dwellings.
All right, so here's the real takeaway from all this. The arrival of Europeans, it wasn't a discovery. Not at all. It was a collision between two incredibly old, incredibly complex worlds. And frankly, neither side had any idea what was coming. And you can see that disconnect right away. It was immediate and it was deep. You look at Columbus's diary, and he's basically saying, wow, these people are so gentle, we could easily enslave all of them. He's immediately thinking about conquest. Meanwhile, what did the native people see? Well, one story describes them seeing a moving island, a ship, and these strange men who drank blood, that's the red wine, and ate wood, those are the hard, dry biscuits. They were just trying to make sense of something completely alien.
It's really interesting how native peoples named the Europeans. A lot of the time, the names were all about their stuff, their technology, like the Innu term for the French, uemshilishigu, which basically means the guys in the wooden canoes or woodworkers. Other groups called them knife men or axe makers. It tells you what really stood out to them, all this weird, powerful metal and wood technology they'd never seen before.
Okay, so this collision, it very quickly and tragically turned into a conquest. And European dominance wasn't just some accident of history. It was really driven by three key things all working together.
So what were those three things? Well, you can think of it as a three-pronged attack. Disease, weapons, and paperwork, basically. Biology, technology, and legal justifications. And each one made the others even more powerful. It was just a devastating combination.
Let's start with the first one, which was by far the deadliest. Disease, an invisible killer. See, people in the Americas had been isolated for thousands of years, so they had zero immunity to diseases from Europe and Africa like smallpox. When those germs hit, it was an absolute catastrophe, a biological terror. Some estimates say as many as 90% of the entire native population died. 90%.
And you can really see the impact on this chart. Yeah, warfare and slavery were horrible, absolutely brutal, but they're just dwarfed by the sheer number of deaths from disease. It was a demographic collapse unlike anything the world had ever seen. Then you've got the technological advantage. It was just a huge gap. Europeans had firearms, cannons, steel armor, and horses. And all of that pretty much overwhelmed traditional native weapons and tactics. It just made fighting back in a direct military conflict incredibly, incredibly difficult.
Okay, so as we move forward in time and the United States starts to take shape, a new tool of conquest gets perfected. And this one was really sneaky because it was all dressed up in the language of law and justice.
You know, you had leaders like George Washington talking about how the U.S. would act with justice and humanity towards native tribes. But, as Johnny Harris puts it, this was often just a facade of justice. In reality, treaties became the main way the U.S. government took land. It was conquest by contract.
And there was this really cynical, predictable cycle that just played out over and over again. Step 1, the government offers to buy land. Step 2, the tribe says no, this is our ancestral home. Step 3, the government uses military force or threats or just straight up lies. And finally, Step 4, a leader is forced to sign a treaty, giving up the land anyway. And this just happened again and again and again.
And this whole process really came to a head with a formal, government-sponsored policy in the American Southeast. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It was ethnic cleansing. This was the Indian Removal Act of 1830. It legalized the forced removal of 5 major tribal nations, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskogee, and Seminole, from their homelands. Why? To make way for the expansion of the Cotton Kingdom. And get this, the Cherokee Nation actually fought back legally. They took their case all the way to the Supreme Court, and they won. The court said they had a right to their land. But, as it turned out, that didn't matter one bit. Because President Andrew Jackson basically just ignored the Supreme Court. His famous response was something like, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." He was basically saying the court was powerless to stop him. And with that, the fate of the southern tribes was sealed.
The result was one of the most brutal acts in American history. Nearly 100,000 people were forced, often at gunpoint, to walk over 1,000 miles. The Cherokee call it the Trail Where We Cried, or the Trail of Tears. Thousands died from disease, hunger, and just the brutal conditions. And what happened to their land? It was given to white settlers to grow cotton, using the labor of enslaved African people.
So why does all this matter? Well, learning this history isn't just about getting the facts right about the past. It forces us to ask some really tough questions. How does a nation's origin story, both the parts we like to tell and the darker truths we uncover, end up shaping its present? The echoes of this collision are still with us, and they continue to shape the world we live in today.